The reaction is, where you lose control you think they hurt you. But if you look closely, something happened before that. There was a moment small, almost invisible where your mind reacted before you even understood what was happening. That moment is where control quietly slips away. Most people never notice this. They believe the world acts on them directly, that words, actions and situations carry emotional weight on their own. But the truth is more subtle. Nothing reaches you without passing through your interpretation first, and that interpretation is often automatic, shaped by past experiences, insecurities, and unconscious patterns you rarely question. This is why two people can face the same situation and feel completely different things. One remains calm, almost unaffected, while the other feels overwhelmed, triggered, or even wounded. The difference is not the event, it is the reaction. And more importantly, it is the speed at which that reaction happens. There is a hidden tension in this process. The faster you react, the less control you have. Reaction feels natural, even justified, but it is often just a reflex, an unexamined response that takes over before awareness has a chance to intervene. In that instant, you are no longer choosing. You are simply repeating. What most people miss is that emotions are not commands, they are signals. But when you treat them as commands, you act immediately, speak without thinking, and attach meaning to things that may not deserve it. The moment you do that, your internal state is no longer yours, it is shaped by whatever just happened outside of you. This is where a quiet shift begins. You start to see that the feeling itself is not the problem, it is the automatic agreement with it. The unquestioned acceptance that this is how I must respond. When you begin to notice this pattern, even slightly, something changes. There is a pause, brief but powerful. In that pause, you are no longer inside the reaction. You are observing it. And that observation is where control begins. It is not dramatic. It does not feel like power at first. It feels subtle, almost insignificant. But in that small space between stimulus and response, you are no longer being pulled. You are no longer immediately shaped by what happens around you. You begin to understand that most of what you call being hurt is not caused in a single moment, it is constructed through interpretation, through meaning, through repetition of the same internal patterns. As this realization deepens, your relationship with emotion changes. You stop identifying with every feeling that appears. You stop assuming that every reaction is valid just because it feels real. Instead, you start to question. You start to watch. And in doing so, you slowly shift from being reactive to being aware. At first, this awareness only appears after the reaction has already happened. You notice it later. Then, over time, you begin to catch it while it's happening. Eventually you start to sense it before it fully forms. That is where control quietly takes root. Control is silent, not expressed. The one who reacts less, controls more. This is rarely understood, because most people associate control with expression, speaking louder, proving a point, showing emotion, asserting presence. But real control operates differently. It is not displayed. It is observed. There is a subtle pattern in human behavior that most people overlook. People are constantly testing boundaries, often without realizing it. Not in obvious or aggressive ways, but through tone, words, timing, and small emotional probes. They are not always trying to harm you, but they are watching how you respond, how quickly you react, what affects you, and every time you react immediately, you reveal something. You reveal your triggers, your sensitivities, your expectations. You make your internal state visible. And once something is visible, it becomes predictable. Once it is predictable, it can be influenced. This is why emotional expression, when uncontrolled, becomes a form of exposure. Not because emotion is wrong, but because unfiltered emotion removes your ability to choose when and how you reveal yourself. It places your internal world on display, where others can read it, interpret it, and sometimes use it. Control, in contrast, is quiet. It does not rush to respond. It does not feel the need to explain itself. It observes first. It allows situations to unfold without immediately stepping into them. This creates a Gaia space where others are uncertain, and uncertainty is powerful. When people cannot easily read you, they hesitate. They question. They become more aware of their own behavior. The dynamic shifts not because you asserted control outwardly, but because you maintained it inwardly. There is an important distinction here. Control is not suppression. It is not about forcing yourself to feel nothing or pretending to be unaffected. That would only create internal pressure. True control is selective expression. It is the ability to feel fully, but choose carefully what you allow to become visible. This requires awareness. Because without awareness, silence becomes avoidance, and expression becomes impulsive. But with awareness, both silence and expression become tools. You begin to notice that not every moment requires your input. Not every statement deserves a response. Not every situation benefits from your emotional involvement. And when you stop engaging automatically, something changes in how others perceive you. You are no longer easy to read. No longer easy to provoke. No longer easy to move. This creates a different kind of presence. One that is not loud, but steady. Not reactive, but intentional. You do not need to prove control, because it becomes evident in what you choose not to do. Over time, this shifts your identity. You stop being someone who responds to everything, and start becoming someone who decides what is worth responding to. And that decision quiet, internal, and deliberates, where control truly exists. Discipline builds an inner boundary. You feel the urge to react, but something holds you back. It doesn't feel like force. It doesn't feel like suppression. It feels like a quiet resistance, as if a part of you is no longer willing to give itself away so easily. This is where discipline begins, not as restriction, but as protection. Most people misunderstand discipline. They see it as effort, as control over behavior, as forcing themselves to act differently. But real discipline operates internally. It protects your attention, your reactions, and most importantly, your emotional space. Without it, everything enters. Every word, every tone, every situation finds a way into your mind and begins to shape your state. What you start to notice is that not everything deserves entry. There is a difference between something happening around you and something entering you. Most people don't see that difference. They allow external events to move directly into their thoughts, into their emotions, into their identity. And once something enters, it begins to influence. This is why small things accumulate. A comment lingers. A look creates doubt. A situation stays in your mind longer than it should. It's not because the event was powerful, it's because there was no boundary. Discipline creates that boundary. At first, it feels subtle. You don't react immediately. You pause. You notice the impulse, but you don't follow it. That alone begins to separate you from the automatic patterns you've been repeating for years. There is tension in this moment. The mind wants to respond. It wants to defend, explain, prove, or release what it feels. But discipline interrupts that process. Not by suppressing the emotion, but by refusing to let it take control of your actions. You begin to see that control is not about eliminating feeling. It is about deciding what to do with it. This is where a deeper understanding forms. You are not responsible for what arises within you, but you are responsible for what you allow to continue. And without discipline, everything continues unchecked. Over time, this creates a separation. Events happen, but they no longer move through you in the same way. You experience them, but they do not settle inside you. They pass, instead of staying. This is the inner boundary. It is not visible. No one sees it. But it changes everything. It determines what affects you and what does not. It filters what enters your mind and what remains outside. And once this boundary becomes stable, your internal state becomes harder to disturb. The transformation is gradual. You start noticing fewer unnecessary reactions, fewer lingering thoughts, less emotional carryover from situations that once stayed with you for hours or days. And in that shift, something becomes clear. You are no longer someone who is shaped by what happens. You are someone who decides what is allowed to stay. The untouchable mind imagines a version of you that nothing can disturb. Not because life becomes easier, but because your internal state is no longer dependent on what happens around you. At first, this idea feels distant, almost unrealistic, because most people are used to being affected subtly, constantly, without noticing. A word changes their mood. A situation lingers in their mind. A reaction from someone else creates a shift inside them. It becomes normal to carry what was never meant to stay. But something changes when you begin to detach, not from people, but from unnecessary involvement. Detachment is often misunderstood as distance or indifference, but it is neither. It is clarity. It is the ability to experience without absorbing, to observe without attaching meaning too quickly. There is a quiet shift that happens here. You stop taking everything personally. Not as a rule, but as a natural outcome of understanding. You begin to see that most behavior is not about you. It is shaped by others' patterns, their emotions, their perspective as things that exist independently of your control. When you see this clearly, something releases. You no longer feel the need to respond to everything. You no longer feel responsible for managing how others act, speak, or feel. That responsibility returns to where it belongs with them, and what remains with you is your own state. This is where inner authority begins. It is not built through force or effort. It is built through consistency, through repeatedly choosing not to engage unnecessarily, through allowing situations to pass without turning them into internal disturbances, through holding your position without needing to assert it. Over time, this becomes your default. Calm is no longer something you try to maintain, it is something that remains unless you choose otherwise. Reactions no longer define your behavior, they become optional. You are no longer pulled into every moment, you decide when to step in and when to remain still. And this creates a different experience of life. Things still happen, people still act unpredictably, situations still carry tension, but none of it reaches you in the same way. There is a separation, not physical, but internal, a quiet distance between what happens and how you experience it. In that space, control exists. Not as something you enforce, but as something you naturally hold. You begin to realize that the goal was never to control the world around you. That was never possible. The only thing that was ever within reach was your response to it, and once that becomes steady, something else becomes clear. When nothing inside you moves without your permission, nothing outside of you can truly control you.